Thanks everyone for coming along, and I swear we did not rig winning that quiz. I know nothing about space, but my boyfriend does, so yeah. So today I'm going to be talking to you about invisible forces, the magic of plasma and thin films. So for this reason, I bought a plasma globe. As a plasma scientist, I've never had one before, and I've had a lot of fun with it over the last few weeks. So if you take nothing away from today, buy yourself a plasma globe. They are really awesome. So just to start off with, who am I and what do I do? So I'm a research engineer at the Swinburne University of Technology, and I work in surface modification and surface characterization. Now, to just talk about a few of those terms to start with, when I say surface, that's obviously a term that a lot of us are familiar with, but just to clarify that the surface is the outer layer of an object. So using a table as an example, most people would think that the top of the table is the surface, whereas the surface is actually the whole object, including the legs and underneath. And when I modify a surface, I use a technique called thin films. So again, for clarification, a thin film is a layer of materials nanometers or micrometers thick. Now don't worry if you don't know what a nanometer or a micrometer is. I'll talk about those a little bit later. So when I say I modify the surface, I put this thin film on the surface. Now this actually doesn't change the properties of the object itself. So if I put a thin film on a table is still a table, it's just a table with a thin film on it. So what does this mean I actually do? Well, it means I get to play around with some really cool stuff in the lab. So this is one of my plasma reactors, or one of our plasma reactors at Swinburne, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. And it also means that I get to work with some really cool surface characterization tools. So a surface characterization technique is something that we use to see if what we made is what we wanted to make. This technique here is what's called an X-ray photoelectron spectrometer, and basically it tells us the surface chemistry of an object. And if you'd like to get one for your lab or for your home, you're looking at about $1 million. So, plasma. This is what I'm talking about today, and this is my plasma globe that I bought. So, what is plasma, really? So, in my talk, preparing my talk today, I did a bit of Googling to see what does the internet think plasma is, and I came across some interesting things. So one of the first ones I came across is Team Plasma. I am not a Pokemon fan, but apparently these are some Pokemon bad guys. Who knew? And often when I tell people I work in plasma, this is the first thing that comes to mind. This is blood plasma, and your blood is about 55% plasma. But actually the plasma that I work in is an excited gas, or an ionized gas. And this cat here is really liking this plasma globe, and after getting my plasma globe, I completely agree. There is nothing cooler than a plasma globe. So, when I say plasma, we have a plasma globe, but what else is there that's plasma? So we have neon lights. Neon lights use electricity to excite a gas, similar to a plasma globe, and that's the bright lights that we get. We also have, and if you're lucky enough to see either the Aurora Borealis in the northern hemisphere or the Aurora Australis in the southern hemisphere, and these are caused by solar winds generating plasma in the upper atmosphere. And we also have lightning. Now, lightning is an electrical current created between two charged regions in the atmosphere, so we've all seen plasma in real life. But what actually is plasma? The fact is that it's light. So basically a plasma is a fragmented gas. So if we think of any gas, air, oxygen, argon, you can create a plasma by adding enough energy to fragment it into ions, electrons, and they collide together with enough energy to create this characteristic light. So my boss, who's here tonight, one of her most hated phrases is that plasma is the fourth state of matter. And I don't disagree with her, but it is true. So a lot of the time, in school you might learn that there's three states of matter. There is a solid, there is liquid, there is a gas. And as I said, if you can apply enough energy, you can generate a plasma. And that's where it has this fragment of positive, negative electrons, etc. It's just a mesh of the actual molecules broken up. So actually 99.9% of the universe is plasma. That doesn't seem true, but it is, because obviously the universe is huge. And there's actually not a lot of rocks, meteors, lakes, oceans, etc. in the universe. So most of what you see when you see all of these space pictures is plasma. So when I say that I work with plasma, how do I make plasmas? And I use a plasma reactor, which I talked about before. One of my friends who's in the audience tonight, when she started at Swinburne, she asked me, what is it you do? And I said, well, I work in plasma and with plasma reactors. And she must have gone away and done some Googling, because this is what she came up with. I don't think she was serious when she asked me, is this the sort of plasma reactors that I work with? And just like I'm not a Pokemon fan, I'm not a Terminator fan. I'm a very bad scientist. There's not a lot of science fiction I actually like. But I saw this, and I've kept this for probably 2 years and was going to use it somewhere, so I'm glad I made use of it tonight. So that's not the type of plasma reactor that I work with. This is my plasma reactor. So basically this is actually a vacuum vessel, so we have a pump attached to it, and we remove the air out of the chamber. We introduce our sample in that front port, and you can see the sample stage here in the middle, and then we add electricity, we add energy through radio frequency, and we generate our plasma. So the plasmas that I create are used to modify surfaces. So how exactly do we do that with plasma if plasma is neon lights and it's lightning, etc.? So what we actually do is we introduce a chemical into our chamber. We call this a monomer, so it's a starting chemical, and this has the chemistry that we want to add to our surface. By just introducing it into the chamber, we convert it from a liquid into a vapor, so from the second state of matter to the third state of matter. And then we apply electricity, like with a lightning or with a neon light, and we generate our plasma. So we have this plasma cloud inside of our chamber, and that actually coats everything inside of our chamber, including the sides, but also our sample. And we get this thin film that I was talking about. So what we call this is a plasma polymer. So it's a specific type of thin film. And what we do is we call this a polymer. So most people, when they think of polymers, they think of plastics. So all polymers and plastics have a starting monomer. So if you think of this like a Lego block, then when you create a polymer or a plastic, something like PET or PVC, you actually repeat those units and you get this repeating subunit, with this repeating structure of subunits. But plasma polymers aren't like that. They're a real mess of fragments. So it's a really interesting technique. We call them polymers, but they're not really. They're not plastics. They're not ordered structures. They're a real mess of the starting monomer. So, what do beards have to do with plasma polymers? Well, in preparing this talk, I was talking to a colleague, and he made me aware of the beard second. So, the beard second is the length the average beard grows in 1 second. So, how quickly do you think a beard actually grows, given that most men might shave once a day, once every few days, etc.? So apparently it's 10 nanometres per second. So again, if you're not familiar with a nanometre, I'll talk about that in a sec. So how fast do you think our plasma polymers grow in relation to a beard? So we deposit our plasma polymer films at 2 nanometres a minute. So you can already see that that's a hell of a lot smaller, or a hell of a lot thinner than a beard second. So that's 0.033 nanometres per second, or 0.033 beard seconds. So I think next time I talk to a scientific audience, I'm not going to talk about nanometres, I'm going to talk in beard seconds, because it does sound pretty cool. So, just about the nanotechnology I was talking about. So we're all familiar with metres and centimetres and millimetres, but there's a whole lot of units smaller than that. So we have our micrometers, and they're actually a millionth of a metre. And we have our nanometers, which are a billionth of a metre. And the plasma polymer films that we deposit are in this nanometre range. So a lot of the films I deposit are 5 20, 100, 200 nanometres. And you would think, well, surely if 100 nanometres is good, then 10 microns is even better. Like, how is more not better? Well, with these sort of films, we actually don't need more, because most of the things that interact with our thin films, they don't see any more than a few nanometres. So if we show one of our plasma polymer films to a bacteria, the bacteria doesn't see the microns underneath, so we typically only tend to work in that 100 plus or minus range. So I talked a lot about plasmas, I've talked about thin films. So what are thin films actually used for? And like how I said that there's a lot of plasma around us that you're not aware of, there's actually quite a lot of thin films around us that you're probably not aware of either. So we have things like anti-reflective coatings on glasses, we have mirrors in telescopes, we have touch screens on our multiple devices that we carry around with us, and we also have our solar cells. So I'm going to go into a few examples and I'm sure a lot of these will become familiar to you. So what can we actually control with thin films? So one of the examples I'm going to start off with is wettability. So wettability is how a surface interacts with water. So if we say a surface is hydrophilic, it means it's water loving, and that means if we put a water droplet on it, that water droplet will spread. If we have a surface which is hydrophobic, that means it's water hating, that water droplet will bead and not spread. So an example of this in nature, you might have seen a lotus leaf where these water droplets bead. So we can make a surface either hydrophilic or hydrophobic, depending on what we want to do with it. So an example of a hydrophilic coating, so a water-loving coating, is what's called self-cleaning glass. So on a normal pane of glass, you'll have water that beads, dirt will collect on that water will evaporate, and you'll get watermarks. Whereas if you can create a hydrophilic surface, so a water-loving surface, that water will just run down the window pane, take the dirt with it, and they refer to that as the self-cleaning glass. So a project that I was involved in a few years ago was actually a water purification project, and this is using plasma polymers. So what we actually did is we coated ordinary sand particles with a hydrophobic, so a water-hating coating, and then we exposed that to oil-contaminated water. And in the case of wettability, like attracts like, so hydrophilic, water-loving attracts water-loving, and water-hating attracts water-hating. Oil is obviously water-hating, so these hydrophobic water-hating particles coagulate or bunch together with the oil, and you can see on the picture on the bottom that actually all falls out of solution. So we actually can clean up oil spills using these hydrophobic or water-hating particles. So we can also work with reflectivity, and this is something that I mentioned before, in that if you have gotten a new pair of glasses anytime soon, or recently, you probably would have been asked, would you like to pay extra to have anti-reflective coating put on it? And basically what that is a thin film, usually on both sides of the glass, and that actually reduces the reflection, so that when somebody looks at you while you're wearing your glasses, they can actually see your face and your eyes, rather than the reflection of themselves in your glasses. So we also have charge. So we should all know that positive and negative attract. That's different to hydrophobicity and hydrophilicity. And what we also did is we did a water treatment project with this. So on the right-hand side, we have water which is contaminated with a group of molecules called humic acids. Now these are actually a byproduct of organic matter degradation. So if you have leaves and sticks, etc., in water, it turns a brown colour, and you probably would have seen this in rainwater or river water. So these humic acid molecules are negatively charged. So again, we got ordinary sand particles, coated them with positively charged groups, and removed them from water. So one of the other interesting things we can do is bacterial growth. And again, this is plasma polymers too. So this is with E. coli bacteria, which I'm sure we all know isn't a great thing. If you're having an implant or something put into your body, you really don't want E. coli bacteria growing on it. So What this experiment here shows is that these are E. coli bacteria. This is a technique called live dead staining. So these live E. coli bacteria are green and the dead E. coli bacteria are red. So you can see on our control surface there's quite a lot of bacteria, whereas on our plasma polymer coated surface there's very little bacteria at all. So this is an antibacterial plasma polymer, so it can be used to actually stop bacteria growing onto a surface. So I've just got my last few to go through. So things like conductivity. So as I mentioned before, if you have a smartphone or a tablet, you have a thin film in there. These have conductive thin films, and without that it wouldn't trace your fingerprint on the screen. And these are also used in certain types of solar cells to generate electricity. We also have marine biofouling. So if you go down by the water, you might see a lot of this sort of algal or barnacle growth. And this is actually a huge problem in the shipping industry, because this actually adds extra weight and extra drag and requires extra fuel. So there's a whole lot of work being done on these paints that go onto the bottom of ships to stop this sort of fouling happening. And the last one, and probably the most important one and something we can all relate to, is biocompatibility. So we all know there's a lot of medical device work happening, things like cochlear implants, knee implants, insulin pumps, etc. And this requires a whole lot of other technologies. So if you have something like a tooth implant, maybe you got it knocked out, or maybe it didn't brush your teeth very well and it decayed, you might have to get an implant. So this actual base here, we might put a thin film coating on that so that the bone integrates better into that device, so that implant actually stays in there. But if we have something like a hip implant, we might want that to happen on this base, but actually in the ball and socket replacement joint, you actually don't want the cells to grow there. You want that joint to remain functional. So on a device like this, we could actually put two different types of thin films. We could put something on this part to make the bone grow into it, or we can put something on this part to actually stop the cells growing into it. So one of my favourite parts about thin films, well, virtually completely useless, is their colour. So these films actually appear different colours depending on how thick they are. And again, I found some really cool pictures. So these are actually nanometre thin films, and they appear different colours. Now, just a quick physics lesson, and to tell you right now, I am not a physicist, so if this is slightly incorrect, I apologise. But basically, all the colours the white light that we see has different colours. And if an object appears red, it appears that way because of the red wavelength of light is reflected and all of the other wavelengths of light are absorbed. So if we have plasma polymer films, or really any thin films, they actually cycle through a range of colours depending on how thick they are. And that's just got to do with the reflectiveness of the light, what wavelengths of light are reflected and what wavelengths of light are absorbed. Completely useless, but very pretty. So, it's demonstration time. So as I said, I was very joyous that I got to buy a plasma globe, but I'm quickly going to run through how a plasma globe works, because even as a plasma scientist, I didn't know how they actually work. So, we have a plasma globe. We have a glass electrode in the centre, and that's where it sort of appears that bright, reddy, orangey colour right in the centre. And then we have a second sphere, and that outer sphere is filled with a gas. So like a neon light, it depends on what gas that is as to what colour this is. I don't know what colour this is. I bought it off eBay. So I don't know what gas it's filled with. Probably argon or neon or something like that. So when we turn it on, this one's already on, the electricity excites the gas and creates a plasma. Then when we bring our hand to it, and this one makes a cool noise. I don't think it's meant to do that, but it makes a noise. Maybe that's because I bought it on eBay. Those electrons in there want to be grounded, so they actually pass through your hand to the floor, and the glass prevents you from being shocked. So what I'm going to do is a quick demo. And if I could just have the lights turned down, yep. So what you might not know is that you can actually light a light bulb with a plasma globe because it generates an electric field. These are fluorescent light bulbs, so these have a mercury vapour inside them. So if you bring them close enough, the electric field from the electrode will light the light bulb. And if we see how close, you can see that it starts to light up. I did this in my kitchen when I bought these light bulbs last week, and I had a lot of fun. So basically you can pull it away and you can sort of see how far the electric field goes. So it works with all fluorescent light bulbs. So I bought the cheapest fluoro I could from Bunnings. And you'll see that this actually lights up as well. And like what I said about your hand in the electrode, if you actually hold your hand on it, you can actually stop the whole tube lighting up because your body grounds those electrodes. So I've got these up here if you want to have a play during the break. You're more than welcome to. So, why is this ended? Oh, representation's ended. What did I do? So hopefully today I've given you a few things to take home and learn about. So hopefully you've learned about the 4 states of matter. So if somebody asks you how many states of matter there are, you can say 4. Hopefully you've learned about beard seconds, which is probably the most interesting things that I learned from this talk. Hopefully you've learned that 99.9% of the universe is actually plasma, and that plasma is really cool, and that it comes in things like neon lights and lightning. Hopefully you've also learned a little bit about thin films and how they can control a variety of properties, things like how water beads, how algae grows on a boat, and how organic solar cells work, or how solar cells in general work. And if you've learned nothing else, and I've already said this, just appreciate how awesome plasma globes are. And thanks for coming.
Thank you. We've got some time to ask Karyn some questions. If anyone has any, now's the time. Okay, I've got a question. I saw a video about making plasma in your microwave.
In a microwave?
In a microwave. Do you know anything about that? Does it work?
I think it does. That's probably something I should have looked up. I think if you, from memory, if you microwave a grape, you can generate plasma because essentially you're getting that gas. So basically what I was saying is if you excite a gas, so I think if you microwave a grape, don't do it and claim I said you should. It might ruin your microwave. But yeah, you can create a microplasma. I think so.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Who else got questions? Yes.
You said your plasma reactor,
yeah.
when you coat something in it, the whole machine
Yes.
becomes coated.
Yes.
How do you clean that?
With a scourer and a lot of time. Yeah, so basically we get the whole chamber fills up and we run an open access user facility. So it means any scientist, student can come in and use it. And when they come to me and they say, I've got crap on my surface, I say, yeah, I probably need to clean that plasma chamber. So yes, means me taking everything apart and scrubbing it with steel wool. Yeah.
Do we have more questions? Yes.
Has this been stored at can you do it at scale?
You can, yes. It's an excellent question. So as part of the company funding source that I work for, I actually went over to the US last year and visited a couple of companies in San Francisco. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. So generally if you have a big enough chamber with a big enough pump, you can do it. There's also a lot of emerging area with what's called atmospheric plasma. So if you sort of almost scale it down, you can create what's called a plasma jet with electrodes really close together and then putting that onto robotic arms. So that's another area. So rather than putting my sample in my chamber, I have a robotic arm with a tiny little, relatively tiny plasma jet that then rasters across the sample and can do the same thing. So that's sort of the 2 areas that you can really do on that scale. Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions? Yes.
Is it expensive to create these big films?
Is it expensive?
No, it's actually, well, expensive is a relative word. Yeah.
So, I've seen this TV show,
Mm.
John Oliver, whatever John Oliver's thing is.
Yeah.
And he had a segment
Yeah.
middle hip joint.
Yeah, the John Oliver show, he featured a segment about the middle hip joint.
Yeah.
And they were having all sorts of problems with it because it was degrading
Yeah.
and it was causing people a lot of discomfort. So I was curious about whether, you mentioned that they would apply a thin film
Yeah.
to that. So I was curious about whether the expense of applying the film would mean that they shortcutted it or someone dropped the ball on that. Like, why did that happen? If that film...
Honestly, I think, there's a lot of work going now into 3D printing, hip implants and stuff. I mean, that's expensive too. I don't think that expense probably in that area is prohibitive. I mean, if you worked at the University of Melbourne and you brought me a hip plant, I could give you a coating for $150. So it's not that expensive. I don't know. I haven't seen that, so yeah, I don't know.
So anyone who wants a hip coated can come to you.
Exactly.
$150.
I mean, there's a whole lot of areas. So, I mean, you might have seen online, you can pay someone to hydrophobically coat your phone.
And we can get it in rainbow.
Yeah, so, it's out there. There are people that are actually having these sort of chambers in their backyards or whatever, and they're charging people money to...
It's a side business.
Yeah, so, I mean, I could do that, I guess.
Science is expensive.
Yeah. But just the government that, funds this facility might not agree with that.
We're not going to tell anyone. This is going up on YouTube. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
So you mentioned plasma is exciting gases.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's really, really hot.
It's not. So there's actually a couple of different types of plasma. So we refer to these as cold plasma. So they're not hot thermally. They have a high electron temperature. So I'm not a physicist, so I can't explain that to you. But basically, yeah. So there are a lot of thermal, high temperature plasma. So if you think about, I think they're looking at spacecraft and they're looking at fusion powered spacecraft. That is extremely hot thermally. These chambers don't heat up. If I have a plasma going, they don't really heat up. So they have what's called a high electron temperature. So yeah, there's a couple of different types of plasma in that respect.
Maybe one more question if there is one. No, otherwise, thank you so much.
Thank you.